Chapter 32:16. In the process of drinking, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also discovered that this Di Yujue was not the coward they thought he was. On the contrary, from Di Yujue's words and actions, they could feel that Di Yujue was definitely not an ordinary person. However, why would such a person like Di Yujue leave just because of Lu Jiangang and Gui Jun's threats? This didn't make sense. Hongzhuang, I feel that this young master seems to be very powerful. I can't see through his cultivation at all. Shangguan Yingying transmitted her voice to Bailey Hongzhuang. As soon as Di Yujue entered the box, she couldn't help but check on Di Yujue's cultivation. In her opinion, since Di Yujue was afraid of Lu Jiangang and Gui Jun, his cultivation couldn't be very strong. It was very likely that he was a cultivator at the 5th level of the Purple Realm like them. Even if he wasn't at the 5th level of the Purple Realm, Shangguan Yingying knew that with a rough sense, she could guess how much stronger he was compared to them. However, after some probing, she found that she couldn't sense Di Yujue's cultivation at all. As soon as her aura got close to Di Yujue, it would be bounced back by a force. At first, she didn't believe it, but after 2 more tries, she had no choice but to believe it. There was a force lingering around his body. No matter who tried to probe, as soon as they got close to him, they would be bounced back. This proved that his strength was definitely not just a little bit stronger than theirs, but an existence that could completely crush them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been unable to even get close to him. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. This young master is not an ordinary person. Maybe we were wrong before. He didn't leave because he was afraid of Lu Jiangang and Gui Jun. I'm afraid he just wanted to leave. Lu Jiangang and Gui Jun happened to appear, and he couldn't be bothered to care about it. So he just left. Now, Bailey Hongzhuang was even more convinced of this possibility. After all, when some cultivators' strength reached a certain level, they really didn't have the interest to care about cultivators who were much weaker than them. As long as they made a move, they could directly kill the other party. To care about this kind of person was just lowering their status. Based on her current observation, this Di Yujue was definitely not the kind of guy who relied on his strength to bully the weak. On the contrary, from his performance, this Di Yujue was most likely from a powerful force because this kind was simply not cultivated by ordinary people. Only some of the most powerful forces could cultivate such an existence. Di Beichun, this friend of his, was very good. Little brother, I have something to say. Thank you for treating me to drinks. See you again. We'll see you again. After 3 rounds of wine, Di Yujue finally stood up. Even though he had drunk a lot of wine, his expression was still the same as usual. There was a hint of drunkenness around his eyes, but his eyes were still clear and bright. Di Beichun also stood up. See you again. See you again. Di Yujue smiled faintly. The next time we meet, I'll definitely treat you to drinks. After Di Yujue left, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2's eyes fell on Di Beichun. Beichun, how do you feel? He's a very interesting person. Di Beichun smiled faintly. Hearing this, Ziren was speechless. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if you know why you wanted to treat him to drinks. Di Beichun shook his head. I still don't know. Chapter 32:17. Upon hearing Di Beichun's reply, everyone was confused. Most importantly, they could not see any hint of perfunctory attitude from Di Beichun's expression. Clearly, Di Beichun was not trying to hide it from them. He really felt that way. I don't know why, but when I saw this person, I had a very strange feeling. It was like déjà vu, or should I say a kind of... Di Beichun frowned, as if searching for an adjective in his mind. A sense of familiarity. When Di Beichun mentioned a sense of familiarity, the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 could not help but change a little. The astonishment in their hearts grew even more intense. A sense of familiarity? Shangguan Yingying raised her eyebrows, her face full of astonishment. She then looked at Ziren. When you see a stranger, you feel a sense of familiarity? Ziren spread out his hands and shook his head. I've never felt this feeling before, and I can't understand it. Are you telling the truth? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichun, a bright light flashing in her clear eyes. Di Beichun nodded slightly. It's true. When I saw him, I had a strange feeling. It was very unfamiliar, but very comfortable. In the face of the people closest to him, Bei-chan did not have the slightest intention to hide, and directly spoke of his most sincere feelings. In fact, if the other party was not Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two, he would not have spoken of this inexplicable feeling at all, because no one would believe him. Bei-chen, could that person be your relative? Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly asked. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the entire room fell into silence. Whether it was Bei-chen, Wen Ziren, or Shang Waning, they all looked at Bailey Hongzhuang in astonishment, their eyes flashing with disbelief. It can't be right? Ziren could not help but exclaim. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze was fixed on Bei-chen. Before you, and I went to the Yu clan to see my parents. I had never seen them before. However, when I saw them, I felt an indescribable sense of closeness. Perhaps this is the kinship that is dissolved in the blood. No matter how long they had been apart, no matter if they had never met before, there would always be a special feeling when they really met. Grandfather said that he had been searching for your biological parents all these years, but he was unable to find them. However, Grandfather has never been to this Penglai Island. As she gradually sorted out her thoughts, Bailey Hongzhuang only felt that everything she said was not impossible. On the contrary, it was very likely. Bei-chen and the other two only thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was joking or just making a guess. However, after listening to everything, they gradually felt that it was not impossible. Bei-chen's true identity, they had never understood it. But in fact, each of them had always been concerned about this matter and had never forgotten it. Bailey Hongzhuang had always kept this matter in her heart. Because of her previous energy, she could empathize with Bei-chen. Even if Bei-chen usually said that it did not matter, she believed that no one would be indifferent to their own identity. In the depths of their hearts, they all wanted to know the reason why they were abandoned, and even could not forget it. Chapter 32:18. Bailey Hongzhuang understood her grandfather very well. All these years, Situ Yin had been searching for news about Bei-chen's birth parents while searching for Mu Jin's. She believed that if her grandfather didn't believe that Bei-chen couldn't let go of the knot in his heart, he wouldn't have been searching so hard. Whether it was Bei-chen's appearance or talent, he was first class. Bailey Hongzhuang really couldn't understand the real reason why Bei-chen's parents had abandoned him. Could it be that his parents had the same difficulties as her own parents? If that was the case, then finding Bei-chen's parents was even more important. Perhaps at the same time that they were not aware of it, Bei-chen's parents were in some place suffering a great deal. Bei-chen had already sunk into silence. Regarding his parents, when he first learned from Situ Yin that he had been brought here, he had resented them. He didn't understand why his parents had abandoned him. However, as time gradually passed and there was no news about his parents, he gradually put this matter to the bottom of his heart. After getting to know Bailey Hongzhuang and learning about Lan Yinxiao and Mu Lingbing's situation, he began to wonder if his parents had abandoned him due to similar difficulties. If that was really the case, then what kind of situation were his parents in right now? However, no matter if it was his master or him, they had spent a lot of effort in this area, but there was still no news. With their status and influence in the Shengxian continent, it wasn't difficult for them to investigate a matter. Even if this matter could be traced back to more than 20 years ago, it shouldn't be to the extent that there was no news at all. However, from start to finish, Bei-chen didn't obtain any information about his birth. Gradually, he gave up on this hope. Perhaps he was overthinking it. Now that Bailey Hongzhuang mentioned it, he suddenly felt that it was possible. How can there be such a coincidence in this world? Bei-chen smiled faintly. You also saw that person just now. At first glance, you can see that his background is not ordinary. If I have a blood relationship with such a person, then why did they abandon me? He had always fantasized that he wasn't really abandoned by his parents, but that they were forced to leave him behind. This kind of result was something he could bear. If she had been deliberately abandoned from the beginning to the end, then what was the point of looking for parents who had no feelings for her? The more Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two thought about it, the more they thought about it. However, when they heard Bei-chen's words, they couldn't help but be stunned. Their expressions then turned ugly. Indeed, if it really had something to do with Diujue, they really couldn't think of any reason to abandon Debachin. None of the cultivators who came to Penglai Island were simple. Presumably, when they were in the Shengxian continent, they must have been doing very well. How could they have been forced to do so? For a moment, everyone fell into silence. Their initial joy had completely disappeared at this moment. Chapter 32:19. Debachin no longer cared about his past. Regardless of whether he had the chance to find out his past in this lifetime, he didn't care too much about it. If it was fated, it would be fated. If it wasn't fated, one shouldn't force it. Compared to other abandoned orphans, he was already extremely lucky. His master had raised him as his own grandson since he was young, and he had a wife who was devoted to him by his side. He didn't have any regrets in his life. Perhaps it was because he had lost some things that he was able to obtain all of this now. Hearing Debachin's words, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but feel a little guilty. She had only thought of this point, but she didn't think of the problem Debachin was thinking about. At this moment, when she spoke of this matter, it was probably a shock to Debachin. Ziren and Shangguan Yingying didn't say anything. In their opinion, it would be best if Debachin could find his birth parents. However, if they really abandoned him for no reason, then there was no meaning in reuniting with such parents. In other words, if it were them, they wouldn't be willing to reunite with such parents. Then, perhaps it's an indescribable fate that makes you feel like an old friend at first sight. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. In this world, many bosom friends appear like this. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know what to say to comfort Debachin. However, even if it was just meeting a bosom friend, it was still a very good thing. After all, the world was so big, there weren't many opportunities to meet such a bosom friend. Debachin nodded with a faint smile. His right hand quietly held Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand. He knew that his wife was thinking of him. These things that he usually didn't notice, Bailey Hongzhuang had probably always been in her heart. However, he himself didn't know why they hit it off so well. Even after drinking, the two of them didn't even reveal their real names. They were just chatting about how they hit it off. Perhaps this was their tacit understanding. After Gao Hanshun and Xiaonan sat down, Gao Hanshun noticed that Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun's expressions were very strange. Their faces were also somewhat pale. Gao Hanshun couldn't help but frown as he asked, "What's wrong with you?" Upon hearing Gao Hanshun's question, Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun immediately wanted to tell Gao Hanshun what had happened. However, after noticing Xiaonan, they swallowed the words back into their stomachs. Given the current situation, it was really not suitable to talk about what had just happened. However, that gaze was really shocking. Even though the other party had already left, they could not help but feel a lingering fear. Gao Hanshun looked at the strange appearance of these two people and knew that something must have happened. However, now was not the right time to talk about it. Therefore, he no longer asked and covered up this matter. There were still 3 days before the auction began. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 discovered that the closer it was to the auction, the more cultivators entered Penglai Island. In just a few days, the number of people in Penglai Island had increased by a lot compared to when they first arrived. Chapter 32:20. It's getting closer and closer to the start of the auction. Recently, the number of cultivators gathered here is really astonishing. However, Penglai Island has also held many other activities. It's very lively. Shangguan Yingying looked at the lively scene downstairs through the windowsill. A faint smile of joy appeared on her face. Putting aside the pressure on them, just looking at this scene made her feel like she had returned to the outside world. Thinking back to the time when she was cultivating, although she felt a lot of pressure, she grew up in Cloud Sword sect. She was not in danger all the time, and her heart had always been very calm. However, ever since she came to Penglai Island, she knew the feeling of having her head tied to her belt. If she was not careful, she would lose her life. Her heart was always in a state of nervousness. This feeling was very uncomfortable. She finally understood what Ziren was thinking when he talked to her about training. It was just that she had never been able to experience it before. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly and nodded. This time, so many cultivators came to Penglai Island. Almost all the shops have benefited. We could take advantage of this opportunity to hold more activities and earn more spirit stones. Ying, if you're very interested, you can go down with Xiren. However, you must be careful not to have any conflicts with others. As the number of cultivators increased, the probability of conflicts also increased. Just in the past few days, they had already seen a lot of big fights. Once the conflict here became big, after a big fight, the result was very likely that only one side would be able to survive. This was also extremely cruel. Penglai Island's guards only cleaned up the battlefield after the battle. Their indifferent expressions were also very chilling. It was obvious that they had long been used to this scene and did not take it seriously at all. Shangguan Ying withdrew her gaze and said, "I think it's best if I don't go out. Otherwise, with my bad temper, I might cause some trouble. Many people here rely on their high cultivation to be unreasonable. I'd better wait patiently for the auction to begin." Looking at Shangguan Ying's well-behaved appearance, when Xiren couldn't help but chuckle. "I didn't expect my Ying to be so sensible. It really surprised me. Come on, I've always been self-aware." Shangguan Ying glared at Xiren and curled her lips. Steward Qin should have arrived at Penglai Island in the next 2 days. Di Bei-chan suddenly said. Xiren nodded. "Speaking of which, the Golden Flame Auction House doesn't even know of our existence. How can they negotiate with us? With the means of the Golden Flame Auction House, since they did such a thing, they must have already investigated our identities clearly. Otherwise, they would not have needed to do this." Di Bei-chan said in a deep voice. Shangguan Ying frowned. "Then why didn't they come to find us when we're already here? I'm afraid it's because they still don't know how much we value the tears of frigid flame." Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a thoughtful light. "Perhaps we will only be able to see their true colors after this auction is over." Chapter 32:21. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Shangguan Ying's face couldn't help but reveal a look of surprise. If that's the case, then Manager Jean is really cunning. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. This is something that everyone knows. Golden Flame Auction House. Have Di Bei and Di Chun arrived at Penglai Island? Old Emperor looked at the submissive manager, Jean, in front of him and asked. Manager Jean bowed slightly and said, "They've been here for 2 days. I've been sending people to keep an eye on their movements. They're currently staying in the restaurant, but they rarely go out. Basically, they're staying behind closed doors." Hearing this, Old Emperor nodded. So that's how it is. Manager Qin also came to Penglai Island, but he didn't come with Di Bei and the others. Moreover, after coming, they didn't have any contact with each other. I can't be sure if Manager Qin's transaction target is them. Maybe they just took advantage of this opportunity to participate in the auction. At this moment, Manager Jean couldn't be sure of the true situation of this matter. His tone was also uncertain. That's not necessarily true. Old Emperor's expression was indifferent. Maybe this is Manager Qin's trick. He just wants to use this method to make you think that there is no connection between them. Manager Jin's expression changed slightly. He also thought of this point, but he couldn't judge which possibility it was. Old Emperor, should we go and invite them to talk now? Manager Jean raised his eyes and asked Old Emperor's opinion. Old Emperor waved his hand and said, "Don't worry. It won't be too late to make a decision after this auction ends and see their performance during the auction." He didn't care if Di Bei and the others had a normal transaction with Manager Qin. He also didn't care how big this transaction was. The only thing he wanted to confirm was whether Di Bei-chan was interested in the tears of glacial flame. As long as he could confirm this point, it was enough. The way to confirm this point was very simple. He just needed to see if they would bid for the tears of glacial flame. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others didn't know that someone was thinking of a way to confirm their identity. They were only thinking about how to obtain the tears of glacial flame. However, even if they knew, they would not give up on their current plan. In the blink of an eye, the day of the auction arrived. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 walked towards the auction house together. The Golden Flame Auction House was located in the center of Penglai Island. The geographical environment was excellent. From afar, they could see a huge building, That was the headquarters of the Golden Flame Auction House. Bailey Hongzhuang believed that this was the largest auction house she had ever seen. The size of the building was beyond her imagination. However, as one of the four great forces, such a building was befitting of Golden Flame Auction House's status. On this street, many cultivators were heading towards the Golden Flame Auction House. This was the biggest auction in the world, and it attracted everyone's attention. Regardless of whether they had an invitation letter or not, they were all gathered in front of the auction house. The items being auctioned in this auction were treasures that cultivators needed. Therefore, many cultivators were thinking of ways to enter and participate in the auction. Chapter 32-22. There are quite a lot of cultivators here. When Xiren sighed, "Fortunately, we have an invitation letter. Otherwise, we can only watch from the sidelines." When they first received the invitation letter from Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxiu, they did not think much about it. Now, they finally understood the importance of the invitation letter. It was not easy for them to come across the auction of the Tears of Glacial Flame. If they stopped outside the auction house because they did not have an invitation letter, that would be the most unacceptable thing. Perhaps this is the will of the heavens. Back then, we met Gao Hanxia and his brother so that we could obtain this invitation. Therefore, this Tears of Cold Flame is destined to fall into our hands, Shangguan Yingying said with a light smile. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, smiles appeared on the faces of the heavy-hearted crowd. Perhaps everything was as Shangguan Yingying had said. That would undoubtedly be for the best. The auction is not far away. Let's enter the auction hall first, Di Beichun said slowly. At this moment, there were many cultivators gathered outside the auction house. However, the number of people in the auction hall was relatively better. Most of the cultivators outside the door did not have an invitation letter, while those in the auction hall had an invitation letter. After Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three entered the auction hall, they realized that the auction hall was much larger than what they had seen from the outside. The entire hall could accommodate thousands of people. Such a scale was truly amazing. The entire hall was abnormally bright. Every piece of scenery and object was meticulously designed, showing off the atmosphere and background of the Golden Flame Auction House. This auction house is really amazing. Just by looking at the layout, I can tell that it's not ordinary. They must have spent a lot of money to build this hall. Xiaohei could not help but sigh. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She looked around and said, "It's really not simple. I'm afraid that only an auction house like this can collect so many rare treasures." She had already seen the auction catalog earlier. Almost every treasure on it could move a cultivator's heart. If she would want to take all of these treasures. Her strength would definitely increase greatly. It was a pity that although they were no longer as poor as before, they were definitely not rich. At this moment, every cultivator standing in the hall was probably quite wealthy. Any cultivator who was able to get an invitation letter was someone who was quite wealthy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be qualified to get an invitation letter at all. Gao Hanshun had the huge heaven-shaking faction as his backing. His income must be extremely rich, which was why he was able to receive the invitation letter. Hence, the objective of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others was very simple. That was to bid for the map fragments and the Tears of Frosty Flame. As for the rest, they could only look at them to satisfy their cravings. "Big brother, look, don't those two guys look familiar?" Lu Jiangang's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun. He felt like he had seen these two guys somewhere before. When they heard Lu Jiangang's words, Gao Hanshun and Gui Jun could not help but look in the direction that Lu Jiangang was pointing at. Their expressions immediately changed a little. Chapter 32-23. That's right, it's the two of them. Gao Hanshun's eyes darkened. When he first saw these two guys, he had a feeling of suspicion in his heart. However, after getting confirmation from Yi Fei, he couldn't say anything more. However, he still had a trace of suspicion in his heart. He didn't expect to meet them here on Penglai Island. "I never thought I'd meet them here." Lu Jiangang's face sank. Yi Fei has been poisoned for so long, but he's still alive. I think it's very likely that the two of them cured Yi Fei. If we had known earlier, we would have stopped the two of them and saved Yi Fei a huge favor. Their plan had been flawless. As long as Yi Li Fei died, they would be able to take root on Emerald Island and expand the heaven-shaking sect's influence. Back then, they had already noticed that Yi Li Fei's body was not as good as before. They never thought that they would not receive any news of Yi Li Fei's death, even after waiting for so long. Now, half a year had passed, and Yi Li Fei was still alive and well. Clearly, the poison in his body had been removed. This was what made them the most depressed. If Yi Li Fei had died, they would still have some hope of returning to Emerald Island. However, not only was Yi Li Fei still alive, but he had also developed the Great Azure Sect. It had completely destroyed their hopes. I never thought that the two of them would be so skilled in medicine. Logically speaking, it's impossible for ordinary doctors to cure Yi Li Fei when he was at the end of his life. We were really one step behind. Guo Jun sighed. It was precisely because they had taken a wrong step that they had taken one wrong step after another. In the end, they had fallen to their current situation. It was truly a pity. After Xiao Nan heard the conversation between Gao Hanshun and the others, his eyes suddenly fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. He could not help but frown. Looking at their clothes, they don't seem to be from the 100 Flowers Gate. Gao Hanshun and the others could not help but look at Xiao Nan when they heard that. They don't look like them? Xiao Nan nodded. There are quite a few disciples from the 100 Flowers sect who have come to the auction this time, but they're all wearing the sect's uniform. The two you speak of aren't wearing it at all, so it doesn't make sense. The expressions of Gao Hanshun and the others could not help but change slightly with that. If they're not from 100 Flowers sect, then who are they? Hold on. I just happen to know a disciple from the 100 Flowers sect. I'll ask him to confirm it, said Xiao Nan. Thank you, Brother Xiao. Gao Hanshun thanked him. Xiao Nan waved his hand. It's just a small matter. It's nothing. Gao Hanshun and the others could not help but look at each other. And the others were slightly gloomy. If these two aren't disciples of the 100 Flowers Gate, then it means that Yi Li Fei was working with them to trick us, Guo Jun said in a deep voice. Lu Jiangang frowned. If these two aren't disciples of the 100 Flowers Gate, then who are they? Why would Yi Li Fei help them lie to us? He was completely baffled. He could not connect the dots at all. It did not make sense. Chapter 32:24. I've always felt that the Yi Li Fei we know wouldn't be able to come up with such a meticulous plan to frame someone. There must be someone else behind him, but after so long, we still haven't found the existence of that military advisor. Do you think it has something to do with these two people? Gao Hanshun narrowed his eyes. Although the two people in front of him looked very young from the first time he saw them, he had a feeling in his heart that these two people were not simple. And this feeling had not dissipated until now when he met them again. Listening to Gao Hanshun's words, Lu Jiangang and Guo Jun's eyes couldn't help but become more serious. At that time, they were inexplicably tricked and fell into such a miserable situation. Until now, they still hadn't found the culprit, so one could imagine the unhappiness in their hearts. Are these two guys so powerful? Lu Jiangang was a little doubtful. Although they look good at their age, I'm afraid it's difficult for them to reach this step. What's more, the pill that controls people's hearts really has such an effect. We should be looking for an alchemist. What if they're alchemists? Gao Hanshun raised his eyebrows. If the two people in front of him had these two identities, then all of this could be linked together. Guo Jun frowned slightly, and his eyes flashed with a puzzled light. Big brother, I understand what you mean, but we don't have any grudges with these two people. Why would they treat us like this? Maybe they receive benefits from Yi Li Fei? Lu Jiangang said. Guo Jun shook his head. No. When they were sent to Yi Li Fei obviously didn't know them. What's more, with Yi Li Fei's character, it's impossible for him to trust two unfamiliar young people. I don't know about this either. Gao Hanshun's face showed a touch of helplessness, as if everything he had thought of before had been overturned by this point. What was the reason for the other party to treat them like this? If he couldn't think of this point, then all of this couldn't be linked together. Forget it. Anyway, as long as I see these two guys, I feel uncomfortable. What bad luck. Lu Jiangang turned his head. As soon as he saw these two guys, he couldn't help but think of the situation of the heaven-shaking faction. So many years of hard work had gone to waste just like that. The blow to them was not an ordinary kind of big. Gue Jun shrugged. Since there are only two of them right now, it won't be too late to make a decision after we confirm whether or not they're disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate. If they aren't disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate, then it means that they are lying to us. We can ask them directly. Gao Hansha nodded. That's right. These two young people don't have any power to resist us. Back then, they had let these two young people go. This time, they would not let them go. As long as they were tortured, they would definitely tell the truth. Then, they would be able to understand everything. While Gao Hanshun and company were conversing, Xiaonan had already brought another man over. Through the man's attire, Gao Hanshun and company could tell a glance that he was a disciple of the Hundred Flowers Gate. Chapter 32-25. Xiaonan introduced with a smile, "This is the disciple of the Hundred Flowers sect I told you about, LV Dong. I've heard so much about you. Nice to meet you." Only after the introductions did Xiao Nan say to LV Dong, "LV Dong, I called you over because I want you to confirm something for me." "What is it?" LV Dong raised an eyebrow. "With our relationship, just tell me. I'll definitely tell you as long as I know." Xiao Nan immediately smiled in satisfaction. "Look at the two young people over there. Are they disciples of your Hundred Flowers sect?" With that, Gao Hanshun, Gue Jun, and Gue Jun all looked at LV Dong. They were just too curious about the result. LV Dong looked in the direction Xiao Nan was pointing at, and his gaze landed on Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Afterwards, he shook his head. "Those two? They shouldn't be disciples of our Hundred Flowers sect. I've never seen them before. There are many disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect, although I can't say that I can recognize every single one of them. I've made it a rule that every disciple has to wear the sect's uniform when we go out this time to avoid conflicts between fellow disciples and being laughed at by others. The two of them aren't wearing it at all, so they can't be disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect." LV Dong looked away and looked at Xiao Nan in confusion. "What's wrong? Is there a problem with that? We've met them before. They said they were disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect. Does that mean they've been lying to us?" Lu Jiangang asked. Gao Hanshun and Gue Jun's expressions changed immediately. They were not disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect at all, which meant they had been lying to them the entire time. Just who were they? Why would they lie to them? Thinking up to there, Gao Hanshun's eyes could not help but become even more sinister. It seemed that the two young people really did have a secret. He had to get to the bottom of it all. He had a vague feeling that everything that had happened on Emerald Island was very likely related to the two of them. However, after hearing Lu Jiangang's words, Lu Dong's eyes darkened. Someone actually dares to use the name of our Hundred Flowers Gate to swindle others? Xiao Anan was also surprised. These two youngsters are quite bold. Don't they know the consequences of pretending to be disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate? Let's go and take a look. I want to question them face to face and see how they can continue to pretend. Lu Dong's face was full of arrogance and disdain. He had always been proud of his identity as a disciple of the Hundred Flowers Gate, but these two fellows who came out of nowhere actually lied about their identities. He wanted to see how these two fellows would continue acting in front of him. Gao Hanshun and the others have been thinking about how to teach Bailey Hongzhuang and Lu Dong a lesson. When they heard that LV Dong was willing to take the lead, the three of them were overjoyed. Now that their statuses were different from before, they had to be more careful when doing things. However, as a disciple of the Hundred Flowers Gate, LV Dong didn't need to care at all. "All right, let's go take a look." Xiaonan nodded and said to Gao Hanshun and the others, "Brother Gao, let's go expose the two of them and recoup your losses." Chapter 32-26. LV Dong waved his hand. "This is something that we disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect should do. I should thank you for reminding me of the existence of such a swindler. If I don't take this opportunity to punish them severely, they'll probably go even further in the future." Even though LV Dong was filled with righteous indignation, he only wanted to show off his ability in front of Xiao Nan. They were just two people pretending to be disciples of the Hundred Flowers sect. Once the real master of the sect appeared, they would definitely piss their pants in fright and kowtow in apology. "Master, I'm afraid we're in trouble. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 studied the surroundings of the hall, waiting for the auction to begin. Suddenly, Xiao Hei's voice rang out in their ears. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but frown when she heard that voice. What is it? Gao Hanchuan's group has discovered us. They're walking towards us right now. They're definitely here to cause trouble, Xiao Hei said. With Xiao Hei's reminder, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 could not help but look in the direction that Xiao Hei was pointing at. Sure enough, Gao Hanchuan's group was walking towards them. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze landed on Gao Hanchun. Gao Hanchun did not avoid her gaze. Clearly, he was coming for Bailey Hongzhuang. Looks like we really are in trouble, Bailey Hongzhuang said indifferently. Enemies really are bound to meet on a narrow road. We met last time, but I never thought that we'd meet again in the auction house. We really can't avoid them. Shangguan Yingying's eyebrows revealed a deep displeasure. She was worried about the auction that was about to begin. She did not expect that Gao Hanchun would appear before the auction. It really ruined her mood. Di Beichen studied Gao Hanchun's group and said, "They're stronger than us, and they've come in such a menacing manner as well. It won't be easy to deal with them. If it was in a remote place, it would be fine." However, there were people everywhere in the auction house. Once a conflict broke out, the impact would be huge. Moreover, they originally wanted to participate in the auction in a low-key manner and obtain the Tears of Glacial Flame. If they directly attracted the attention of so many people, it would be impossible for them to keep a low profile later. Since we're already here, there's nothing we can do. We can only take it one step at a time. Xiren sighed. Right now, they had no other choice but to deal with the situation as they saw fit. At this moment, Gao Hanchuan's group of 5 had already arrived in front of Bailey Hongzhuang's group. Gao Hanchun originally thought that only Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were together. He did not expect that when Xiren and Shangguan Yingying were also with them. It turned out that it was a team of 4 people, not 2. Thinking of this, Gao Hanchun only felt a thought emerge in his mind. Before he could figure out what was going on, the thought had already dissipated, and he couldn't recall it for a while. I never thought that we'd meet again, Doctor from the 100 Flowers Order. Gao Hanchuan's gaze was indifferent and cold. Thinking back to how arrogant Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying were in front of them, he wanted to see how these 2 would answer. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also knew that it was useless for them to pretend not to know each other. She immediately said, "Association Leader Gao, what a coincidence." Chapter 32:27. They were not unfamiliar with this attire. The alchemists from the 100 Flowers sect that Steward Qin had invited had the same symbol on their clothes. Clearly, they represented the 100 Flowers sect. Because of this, Bailey Hongzhuang did not directly answer Gao Hanchuan's question. If she continued to pretend to be a disciple of the 100 Flowers sect, she would undoubtedly be seen through. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang did not take the bait, Gao Hanchun got straight to the point. "I just happen to have a doctor from the 100 Flowers sect here. Do you know him?" Lu Jiangang and the others all looked at Bailey Hongzhuang, waiting for Bailey Hongzhuang's answer. Bailey Hongzhuang's heart sank when she heard that. She understood Gao Hanchuan's intentions. It seemed that Gao Hanchun had purposely brought a cultivator from the 100 Flowers sect to cause trouble. "I don't know him," Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. With that, LV Dong could not help but step forward. He said sternly, "Just who are you 2? How dare you pretend to be a disciple of the 100 Flowers sect?" LV Dong's voice could be said to be very loud. In a short moment, it had already attracted the attention of everyone present. Everyone had been waiting for the auction to begin. Now that they suddenly heard such a large commotion, they could not help but turn around to pay attention. When LV Dong noticed that he had attracted so many people's gazes, he did not feel embarrassed at all. On the contrary, he seemed extremely proud. As a disciple of the 100 Flowers sect, he had always attracted a lot of attention. At that moment, everyone could not help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen with disdain. Pretending to be a disciple of the 100 Flowers sect was one thing, but now that they had been caught by the real deal, it was extremely humiliating. Di Beichen glanced at LV Dong indifferently and said, "Sir, when did we pretend to be disciples of the 100 Flowers sect?" You can't just randomly throw dirty water at someone. Firstly, we didn't call ourselves disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate. Secondly, we didn't wear the uniform of the Hundred Flowers Gate. Furthermore, we don't seem to have met each other before. For you to suddenly come up and give us such a big name, we really can't accept it. Bailey Hongzhuang looked indifferent. Her gaze towards LV Dong was filled with confusion, as if she was looking at a lunatic. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, LV Dong couldn't help but be dumbfounded. He never thought that these two people would deny it, but under such circumstances, it was really hard to refute them. When Lu Jiangang and the others saw this, they couldn't help but say, "You said you were a disciple of the Hundred Flowers Gate in front of us before. Are you going to deny it now? Do you have any evidence?" Di Beichun asked casually. They were clearly here to cause trouble, so they might as well deny it. As a result, there was nothing Gao Hanshun and the others could do. Gao Hanshun could not help but chuckle when he saw Di Beichun like this. "I really didn't think the two of you would change faces so quickly. You've really broadened my horizons. Gang Master Gao, we've only met once. I really don't understand why you've come to cause trouble for us. Just say what you want to say. There's no need to go out of your way to accuse us," Bailey Hongzhuang said coldly. Chapter 32:28. LV Dong stared coldly at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other man. "But I'm warning you, if you dare to pretend to be a disciple of the Hundred Flowers Gate on Penglai Island, you could lose your life at any time. Our Hundred Flowers Gate's reputation cannot be slandered by people like you." In the beginning, he only thought that the two of them would quickly admit their mistakes after seeing him. He never thought that the two of them would act shamelessly, so he was a bit stunned. However, he quickly reacted. There were many cultivators in the world who wouldn't give up until they saw the coffin. Most of them wouldn't admit it unless they were caught in the act. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's expressions were complicated. They could only wonder where this idiot had come from. They originally only wanted to participate in this auction in a low-key manner. They never thought that they would attract everyone's attention. It was terrible. What are you trying to do? At this point, Di Beichun no longer played games with them. At the end of the day, even if Gao Hanshun was suspicious of them, it was only suspicion. Since you're not disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate, who are you? Gao Hanshun narrowed his eyes and glared sharply at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other man. The two of them had deceived them and colluded with Yi Fei. No one would believe that they didn't know the inside story. "I don't think we need to explain things like this to you," Di Beichun said coldly. At this moment, LV Dong stepped forward. "I'm giving you a chance to make up for your mistakes. If you don't tell me everything, don't blame me for being rude." Following LV Dong's words, Gao Hanshun's group of 5 looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 with unfriendly expressions. Clearly, they were ready to attack at any moment. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze gradually turned cold. It seemed that today's battle was unavoidable. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly came from behind Bailey Hongzhuang. "LV Dong, what are you doing here?" Lu Dong, who was originally arrogant, quickly restrained his arrogant expression after seeing the person who came. He said respectfully, "Master Mo." Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but turn her head to look at the person who had arrived. With this glance, her eyes could not help but flash with a trace of surprise, because this person was none other than the alchemist she had met in the demon refining tower back then, Mo Xingyu. Mo Xingyu's gaze landed on Bailey Hongzhuang, and a smile quickly appeared on his face. "Young Master D, I didn't expect to see you here. What a coincidence." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and said, "Nice to meet you, Master Mo." Hearing this, Mo Xingyu waved his hand and said, "I don't have the right to call myself a master in front of you. You're the real master." As he spoke, Mo Xingyu couldn't help but glance between LV Dong and Bailey Hongzhuang. Not long after he entered the auction house, he noticed that everyone was looking in the same direction. He couldn't help but walk over to take a look. However, from the current situation, it seemed like there was a conflict between LV Dong and Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 32:29. When Lu Dong saw Mo Xingyu, he planned to complain to Mo Xingyu, but after hearing the conversation between Mo Xingyu and Bailey Hongzhuang, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. He couldn't help but rub his eyes, wondering if he was dreaming. Mo Xingyu was a true alchemy master in the Hundred Flowers sect. His alchemy skills were extremely powerful, and he had a very high status in the sect. First of all, he was just an ordinary disciple who had joined the Hundred Flowers sect not long ago. Furthermore, he was only a doctor and not an alchemist. It could be seen that the difference between him and Mo Xingyu wasn't small. If it wasn't for the chance to talk to Mo Xingyu last time, Mo Xingyu probably wouldn't even know of his existence. However, Mo Xingyu was being so polite to this cultivator who was pretending to be a disciple of the Hundred Flowers sect. He even said that the other party was a true master. Wasn't this a bit too shocking? Young Master D, is there a conflict between the two of you? Mo Xingyu slowly asked. Hearing Mo Xingyu's words, Lu Dong couldn't help but shiver. His expression quickly turned ugly. He really didn't expect that he was just teaching two unknown cultivators a lesson. How did this have anything to do with Mo Xingyu? Bailey Hongzhuang was a discerning person. Naturally, she knew that Mo Xingyu had appeared to help her solve the problem. Although it was a favor, she still accepted it. This young Master Lu that I've never met before has been clamoring for us to do so and so. Bailey Hongzhuang faintly smiled. Speaking of which, other than the last time I saw Master Mo, I've never seen a disciple of the Hundred Flowers sect. I've always wanted to join the Hundred Flowers Gate, but from the looks of it, they're not even on the same level. It's really surprising. Bailey Hongzhuang had never had a good impression of Lu Dong, a guy who deliberately bullied others just to let himself be in the limelight. Even if she was now using other people's hands, she had to teach Lu Dong a good lesson. It wasn't that easy to help Gao Hanshun and the others. If he wasn't careful, he could lose his life. It really wasn't worth it. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Mo Xingyu's brows quickly furrowed. He turned to Lu Dong and said, Lu Dong, are you being disrespectful to young Master D? Master Mo, I only heard that young Master D was pretending to be a disciple of the Hundred Flowers sect. I'm carrying the responsibility of every disciple to remind him. Lu Dong looked troubled. He didn't want Master Mo to think that he was someone who was looking for trouble outside, so he could only tell him the reason. However, after hearing LV Dong's words, Mo Xingyu was even more speechless. What nonsense are you talking about? With young master status, why would he pretend to be a disciple? You to B's twos come up with such a ridiculous reason? Gao, and the others, Gao, and the others were, and the others, they and the sea, and the others was they and everyone. Never in their wildest dreams would they have expected such an outcome. It was simply too shocking. Lu Dong couldn't help but look at Gao Hanshun and the others. The anger in his eyes couldn't be more obvious. The other party was someone that Master Mo had repeatedly invited. No matter how he thought about it, he knew that there was no need for them to pretend. Chapter 32:30. Noticing LV Dong's gaze, Gao Hanshun and the other two were at a loss for words. They clearly remembered everything that had happened. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had clearly lied about being disciples of the Hundred Flowers Order in front of them. Furthermore, they could clearly remember their arrogant expressions and mannerisms. Yet, in such a short time, how did the situation completely change? Thinking of LV Dong's hatred towards them, they felt helpless. They never thought that not only would they not be able to teach Bailey Hongzhuang a lesson, they would even offend LV Dong. This was not a good thing for them. If it weren't for the fact that the identity of Master Mo in front of them was very unusual, they would have doubted whether this was a play put together by Bailey Hongzhuang and Mo Xingyu in order to trick them. Xiaonan's expression was extremely ugly. He never thought that things would turn out this way. Although he had only heard about this matter from the beginning to the end from Gao Hanshun and the others, he was still the one who had found LV Dong. Now that LV Dong was in trouble, his friendship with LV Dong would inevitably be affected. It wasn't easy to befriend the disciples of the Hundred Flowers Gate, and knowing LV Dong had saved him a lot of trouble. He didn't expect this to happen. It was unlikely that he would be able to ask LV Dong for help in the future. This was terrible. Thinking of this, Xiaonan could not help but blame Gao Hanshun and the other two. He did not know what was wrong with the three of them for them to slander each other. Xiaonan was not the only one who had such thoughts. Everyone present could not help but change their opinions. Previously, even though Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had not admitted it, everyone was still very disdainful because they did not believe it at all. As an alchemist of the 100 Flowers Order, Mo Xingyu's status was extremely honorable and his reputation was even greater. Many people present knew him very well. Since these words had come from Mo Xingyu's mouth, there was no need to think to know that there was no problem. With Mo Xingyu's status, there was no need for him to lie for Bailey Hongzhuang. Furthermore, from Mo Xingyu's respectful attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang, this Bailey Hongzhuang was clearly an extraordinary person. Master Mo, I don't know either. LV Dong could not help but ask. He had finally managed to gain a foothold in the 100 Flowers Order. If Mo Xingyu wanted to teach him a lesson, he only needed to go back and say a few words, and he would very likely be kicked out of the 100 Flowers Order. This was not an outcome he could bear. Mo Xingyu's eyes darkened. Since you don't know, then what nonsense are you spouting? As a disciple of the 100 Flowers Gate, your every word and action represents your identity as a member of the 100 Flowers Gate. Don't you know that? Through your actions, how many people will misunderstand that our 100 Flowers Gate is being unreasonable? Every time he heard Mo Xingyu's words, LV Dong's heart sank a little. He knew Mo Xingyu well. Normally, he rarely lectured people, but now, the more severe he was lecturing, the more important Bailey Hongzhuang was to him. Thinking up to here, LV Dong was simply about to die from regret. If he had known earlier, why would he have wanted to be in the limelight? At this moment, not only did he lose all his face, he might even lose his future. This was simply unlucky to the extreme. Chapter 32-31. Originally, they were afraid that they would have to fight, but who would have thought that Mo Xingyu's appearance would solve all the problems? Looking at LV Dong's regretful expression, they were extremely happy. Speaking of which, this was all thanks to Bailey Hongzhuang. If it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang coincidentally knowing Mo Xingyu and Mo Xingyu admiring her, this situation wouldn't have happened. I was wrong this time. I won't do it again. LV Dong lowered his head and his voice became softer and softer. Compared to his arrogant appearance before, it was a completely different attitude. If the crowd hadn't seen this change with their own eyes, they would have thought that they were two different people. At this moment, LV Dong only felt that his face was burning. He had never been so embarrassed in such a long time. The more arrogant he acted before, the more thoroughly he lost face now. It was really embarrassing to the extreme. However, Mo Xingyu didn't forgive LV Dong just because of his actions. Instead, he said, "The person you wronged is young Master D. If you want to apologize to young Master D. If young Master D forgives you, then this matter is over. If young Master D doesn't forgive you, then be prepared to be punished when you return to the 100 Flowers sect." As Mo Xingyu's voice fell, LV Dong couldn't help but raise his head. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, and at the same time, his face had become extremely ugly. When he noticed Mo Xingyu's serious expression, LV Dong knew that everything Mo Xingyu said was true. If he couldn't calm Bailey Hongzhuang today, then his days after returning to the 100 Flowers sect would be very difficult. Even if his heart was unwilling, Lu Dong could only apologize to Bailey Hongzhuang at this moment. After all, this was related to his own future. Young Master D, I was blind before. I must have made a mistake and wronged you. I hope you won't hold a grudge against me and forgive me this time. LV Dong bowed deeply to Bailey Hongzhuang. His attitude was extremely sincere. Now that things had reached this point, lowering his head was inevitable. He might as well show him more thoroughly. He had offended someone he shouldn't have, but at least he had a chance to make up for it. At this moment, LV Dong was no longer dissatisfied with Bailey Hongzhuang. After all, it was meaningless for the weak to be dissatisfied with the strong. As long as Bailey Hongzhuang did not find trouble with him in the future, he would be thankful. Mo Xingyu's gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang as he said, "Young Master D, it's up to you to decide how to deal with this matter." Gao Hanshun and the others felt as if they were sitting on pins and needles after seeing this scene. They had no idea what kind of person Bailey Hongzhuang was. Could it be that they had recognized the wrong person? Back then, those two fellows only looked ordinary. If they really had such status and identity, then there was no need to hide at all. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Master Mo, since this is a misunderstanding, it's fine as long as it's resolved. LV Dong, did you hear that? Young Master D has forgiven you. You can't make such a mistake again in the future. LV Dong nodded repeatedly. His voice was filled with excitement, and he felt his entire body relax. Chapter 32. At this point, LV Dong could not help but turn his head to look at Gao Han and the other two. The hatred in his eyes could not be more obvious. If he did not listen to their slanderous words, why would he take the initiative to look for trouble with Bailey Hongzhuang? This was an undeserved disaster. Noticing LV Dong's resentful gaze, Gao Han and the others felt their hearts skip a beat. The development of the situation was beyond their expectations. They did not intend to trick LV Dong. However, it was obvious that no matter how they explained to LV Dong, it was useless. LV Dong would not believe them at all. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded her head faintly, her eyes moving away from Lu Dong's body. She did not intend to say anything more. Young Master D, did you come to Panlai Island to participate in the auction? Seeing that the matter had been settled, Mo Xingyu did not have the mood to pay attention to LV Dong. Instead, he focused on Bailey Hongzhuang. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and smiled faintly. The Golden Flame auction this time has such a big impact. We have never been to Panlai Island before. Coincidentally, we had the opportunity to take a look, so we came together. I see. Mo Xingyu smiled faintly. I wonder how young Master D has been in the Demon Tower recently? Do you have any plans to leave? We are currently in the Demon Tower for the arena competition. This time, we came to the auction to see if there are any treasures that can increase our strength. We will not leave for the time being, Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang did not plan to leave the Demon Tower for the time being, Mo Xingyu was a little disappointed. However, his face was still brimming with a smile. The training in the Demon Tower is not something that could be completed in a short period of time. It will take a lot of time. I hope that young Master D can successfully obtain the Demon Tower's inheritance. When that time comes, you will really amaze the world. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and waved her hand. Master Mo really thinks too highly of me. Although I have such thoughts, I know that it is not so easy to do. However, it is also good to use this opportunity to increase my cultivation. Young Master D, don't forget to visit our 100 Flowers Island when you have the chance. Contact me in advance when the time comes. As the host, I will definitely accompany you. Of course. Bailey Hongzhuang cupped his hands and smiled. After LV Dong left, Xiao Nan, Gao Han and the others also retreated a little, standing not far from Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. At this distance, they could clearly hear the conversation between Mo Xingyu and Bailey Hongzhuang. However, the more they heard, the more shocked they were. Brother Gao, I think you've got the wrong person. How could such a person pretend to be a disciple of the 100 Flowers Gate? Xiao Nan's eyes were filled with displeasure. He never thought that Gao Han would do such an unreliable thing. Originally, he only wanted to show off his connections. He never thought that he would completely offend LV Dong. When he thought of LV Dong's gloomy face, he did not even have the courage to go over and apologize. Gao Han could naturally hear the displeasure in Xiao Nan's words. He could not help but say, Big Brother Xiao, I know you won't believe me, but this matter has indeed happened before. As for why it has become like this now, I don't know either. Chapter 32-33. Forget it. So what if these two really claimed to be disciples of the 100 Flowers sect? There's no point in saying that now. Xiaonan waved his hand, clearly not intending to listen to Gao Han and the other two's explanation. I'll go look for LV Dong first. I hope he'll calm down. This time, he's really in trouble. Brother Xiao, why don't we go and apologize together? This is really beyond our expectations. We're really sorry to LV Dong. Gue Jun could not help but say. However, Xiao Anin shook his head. He's in a fit of anger now. I'm afraid I won't be in a good mood if I go. If you guys go, I'm afraid he won't be able to hold back his anger. Let's just stay here for now." After Xiao Nan left, Gao Han and the other two looked at each other, their expressions extremely ugly. I remember that these two guys were the ones we met back then. It's only been half a year since we last met. How had they become so unfathomable? Gue Jun's face was filled with confusion. He could not figure out where the problem came from. Could it be that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had a great opportunity in the past half a year? I'm not sure. I just don't understand. If these two guys are really so capable, why did they lie to us back then? Aren't they just looking for trouble? Lu Jiangang shook his head. He simply couldn't wrap his head around the events that had just transpired. Gao Hanchuan's gaze gradually deepened. His sharp gaze fell on Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. If his suspicions about Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were not deep enough before, now he increasingly felt that these two were not simple. There must be something he had overlooked. According to Master Mo, this young Master D should be an alchemist? Gao Hanchun suddenly asked. Hearing that, Gue Jun and Lu Jiangang both nodded. That's right. We've never understood who refined the pill that could control people's hearts. There's no such expert on Emerald Island, and Yi Li Fei doesn't have the ability to refine such a pill. If this young Master D is a very powerful alchemist master, then all these problems can be connected, right? Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun couldn't help but be stunned when they heard this. This idea was really a little shocking, but it just so happened that everything could be linked together. Big brother, do you mean that the medicinal pills were given to Yi Li Fei by these two fellows? Not bad. Gao Hanchuan's gaze gradually sharpened. Although I don't have any evidence, I feel that this matter is most likely true. So, in this way, the reason we've fallen into such a state is the result of these fellows working together with Yi Li Fei. Lu Jiangang's voice rose slightly, and it was filled with shock and disbelief. Gao Hanchun nodded. Haven't we always wondered why Yi Li Fei, who is obviously poisoned and beyond cure, is still alive and well? It seems like he hasn't been affected at all. Ordinary doctors of the 100 Flowers Gate are unable to treat the illness, but in the hands of young Master D, that may not necessarily be the case. In a short period of time, Gao Hanchun had already connected all these together. All the places that he didn't understand were now all clear. Chapter 32-34. After chatting with Bailey Hongzhuang for a while, Mo Xingyu left as well. He had brought the other disciples of the 100 Flowers Gate with him this time, as he still had some matters to attend to. Speaking of which, that LV Dong is really unlucky. Mo Xingyu just happened to be here, and he got scolded so badly. Shang Ying could not help but chuckle. The feeling of being arrogant and suddenly finding out that he had kicked an iron plate was probably not good. Di Beichen's expression was calm, but his eyes that were as deep as the sea revealed a hint of seriousness. Gao Hanchun and the others have already placed their attention on us. I'm afraid that they will keep an eye on us after the auction ends. It might be troublesome when we leave the Golden Flame auction house later. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. I'm afraid that these guys will be waiting outside the auction house for us to leave. They should be holding a grudge against us for what happened on Emerald Island back then, so they want to take revenge when they see us. From what I can see, they're now in contact with the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect and the disciples of the 100 Flowers Gate. From the looks of it, they should be doing quite well. Why are they still so concerned about what happened back then? Xiren raised his eyebrows. Although he had always hoped that Gao Hanchuan's life would get worse and worse from the current situation, although the heaven-shaking faction had retreated from Emerald Island, it seemed that they were still doing well. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. In my opinion, the situation shouldn't be like that, Di Beichun suddenly said. For a moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two's gazes fell on Di Beichen. They did not know what Di Beichen's judgment was. If they are really doing well during this period of time, they shouldn't be begging the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect. When we saw them in the restaurant a few days ago, Gao Hanchun was clearly very respectful to the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect. Logically speaking, although the heaven-shaking faction cannot be compared to the Crimson Moon sect. One is an ordinary disciple of the Crimson Moon sect, and the other is the leader of the heaven-shaking faction. Obviously, the leader of the heaven-shaking faction has a higher status. What if that person wasn't an ordinary disciple of the Crimson Moon sect? If he wasn't, then he wouldn't have stood there silently when Mo Xingyu was talking. Di Baichen replied. As Di Baichen's voice fell, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two immediately understood. They had not thought of this possibility before, but now it seemed that Gao Hanshun and the other two were in a very bad situation. Baichen, do you think it's because their heaven-shaking faction can no longer survive, so they came to seek refuge with the cultivators of the Crimson Moon sect? Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Di Baichen's eyes flashed as he pondered. It's possible, but I can't be sure. If that's really the case, that would be great. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. These guys are so despicable. If the Shocking Heavens faction fails, they won't be able to accept this blow. Let's go back and ask someone to find out. Bailey Hongzhuang said. Not long after, the auction was finally about to begin. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three immediately walked towards the entrance of the auction hall. At the same time, Di Baichen and Wen Xiren took out their invitation letters. Chapter 32-35. As Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 lined up, Gao Hanchuan's group of 3 followed closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang's group. Gao Hanchuan's group did not avoid the gazes of Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4. Clearly, they already hated Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4. Now, they had nothing to lose. In any case, they were not worried that Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 could do anything to them. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 did not say anything about this. They just pretended not to see anything. To them, obtaining the tears of frigid fire was the most important thing. They were not in the mood to argue with Gao Hanchuan's group. Xiaonan returned to Gao Hanchuan's group after speaking with LV Dong for a while. Seeing this, Lu Jiangang could not help but ask, Brother Xiao, how is LV Dong? Xiaonan shook his head. He's still angry. No matter what I say, he won't listen. We can only think of a way to make up for it in the future. Xiaonan was also very helpless about this. If he had known this would happen, he would not have called LV Dong. He did not expect to cause so much trouble. If he wanted to mend this relationship, he would have to pay a hefty price. Brother Xiao, we've implicated you this time. We're really sorry. Gao Hanchuan's face was filled with guilt. Speaking of which, this matter was completely between them and Bailey Hongzhuang. He was really apologetic for dragging Xiaonan and LV Dong into this. Xiaonan, who was originally very unhappy, looked much better after seeing Gao Hanchuan's sincere apology. Forget it. Since it's already like this, I know you guys don't want it to be like this. Although Xiaonan's heart ached for his loss, since it was already like this, if he became unhappy with Gao Hanchuan's group because of this matter, his loss would be even greater. Although Gao Hanshun and Xiaonan's voices were very soft, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 still heard it. They could not help but be even more certain of Di Baichen's judgment. When they first met Gao Hanshun was not an ordinary arrogant person. Why would he apologize to someone like this? At this moment, a woman with a smile on her face said to Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Young master, please show us your invitation letter. Hearing this, Di Baichen and Xiren immediately took out their invitations. After checking Di Baichen and Wen Xiren's invitation letters, the woman nodded and said to the woman who was taking notes, number 52 and number 53. However, when Gao Hanshun heard the number of invitations mentioned by the woman, his pupils widened in an instant, and his face was filled with shock. His eyes were locked on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3. At this moment, his eyes turned red due to congested blood. He looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the others with a gaze that seemed to be filled with deep hatred. Lu Jiangang and the others noticed the change in Gao Hanchuan's expression, and their expressions could not help but change. A hint of panic appeared on their faces. Big brother, what's wrong with you? However, Gao Hanshun did not seem to hear Lu Jiangang's words at all. His hands were tightly clenched into fists, and the veins on his temples bulged. He looked like an enraged lion and was extremely terrifying. Number 52 and number 53. That's the invitation letter I sent to my younger brother. After hearing the number on the invitation, Gao Hanshun connected all the dots in an instant. Chapter 32-36. Now, he finally understood that the murderers of his two younger brothers were the four people in front of him. Why did these four people treat the Jintian faction like this? The root cause was here. The murderers that he had always wanted to find were actually right in front of him. As Gao Hanshun's voice fell, Lu Jiangang, Gue Jun, and Xiaonan could not help but be stunned. After they reacted, they looked at Bailey Hongzhuang, and the look in their eyes suddenly changed. They're the murderers? Gue Jun's face was filled with disbelief. Although he had always thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was very likely to be Li Fei's advisor behind the scenes, he had never thought that they would be the murderers of Gao Hanshun's younger brothers. If this was really the case, didn't it mean that they had already found the murderers on Emerald Island? But because they did not recognize them, they could only watch the murderers slip away in front of their eyes? Lu Jiang'an's expression was also extremely complicated. Their Jintian faction had developed from such a prosperous situation to such a destitute state. He had never thought that the culprit would be the murderers of Gao Hanshun's two younger brothers. Then these guys had simply ruined everything for them. Although Xiaonan was not clear about the process, he had only heard about it from Gao Hanshun and the other two. However, he did not expect that the murderers would appear in front of them so easily. Gao Hanshun stared at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. He had already determined this result in his heart because he had given these two invitation letters to his two younger brothers. His two younger brothers had been killed before they arrived at Penglai Island, and the things on them must have been taken away by the murderers. Now that these two invitation letters had appeared here, the reason was self-evident. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three obviously did not expect that Gao Hanshun would recognize the number on the invitation letter and directly determine their identity through the number. They could not help but curse in their hearts. This Gao Hanshun is too shrewd. He even remembers the number on the invitation letter clearly. I'm afraid it's impossible for us to continue hiding. Shangguan Yingying's face was a little ugly. They had been hiding this very well. She didn't expect that their identity would be exposed because of an invitation. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were also surprised. They had never noticed that the invitation letter had a serial number. They didn't expect that this would become their biggest flaw. In this way, no matter how they tried to defend themselves, it was useless. Gao Hanshun had already determined that they were the murderers. You four damn bastards! How dare you kill my brother? Gao Hanshun strode forward and grabbed Di Beichen's collar with one hand. He had never hated anyone so much. It was because of these guys in front of him that he had fallen from his high spirits to his current state. His brother had died in the hands of these four guys. Di Beichen directly slapped Gao Hanshun's hand away. His handsome face was cold. If they didn't have evil intentions towards us, why would we send them on their way? Speaking of which, gang leader Gao's two brothers really have the same temperament as you. They are both so arrogant that it's annoying. Chapter 32-37. Seeing that Di Beichen had admitted it himself, Gao Hanshun was even more furious. For such a long time, he had been in extreme pain because he had not been able to find Gao Hanxiu and Gao Hanxia's murderers. His younger brother had been killed, and he had seen the faces of those who had killed his younger brother with his own eyes. However, after such a long time, he still had not been able to find the murderers and avenge his younger brother. He had thought that with the power of the Jintian Association, it would be a simple matter to find the four cultivators who had just arrived on Penglai Island. However, the final result was a vicious slap to his face. However, he had never thought that the murderers had already appeared in front of him, and he had missed them just like that. Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun also glared at Di Beichen's group of four. At this moment, they finally understood why Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four would help Li Fei to treat them like this, even though they had no enmity with each other. It turned out that they had already formed a grudge against them long ago. However, at the same time, they also felt that Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four were extremely terrifying. They were just cultivators who had just arrived on Penglai Island. According to common sense, they should have no power to resist at all and could only be captured without putting up a fight. However, Not only had they slipped away before their eyes, they had even completely destroyed the Jintian Association. This kind of ability was really shocking. A complicated light flashed in Xiao Nan's eyes. He had heard about Gao Hanchuan's younger brother's murder earlier, but after the news had spread, he had only thought that it was a pretense used by Gao Hanchun to expand his power. Now, it seemed that it was real and not just a pretense. You killed my younger brother. I said that I would definitely take your lives. Gao Hanchun narrowed his eyes, and a strong, murderous intent shot out from his eyes. He wanted nothing more than to tear Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 into 1,000 pieces. Facing Gao Hanchuan's gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 remained calm. Now that things had come to this, they were no longer the same as when they had first arrived at Penglai Island. Even if Gao Hanchun and the others were stronger than them, they could not only run away. They had been unwilling to reveal their identities because they felt that their current strength was not enough to completely defeat Gao Hanchun and the others. If they were strong enough, then there was no need for Gao Hanchun to come find them. They would have already taken Gao Hanchuan's life. At this moment, Gao Hanchun didn't want to say anything. His enemies were right in front of him. He just wanted to chop off their heads right now. Vigorous elemental energy exploded from within Gao Hanchuan's body. Without any hesitation, it directly attacked Di Beichun in front of him. He wanted to kill these guys to avenge his brothers. The sudden presence of essence energy instantly attracted the attention of all the cultivators present. Everyone's gaze locked onto Gao Hanchun. Everyone was speechless when they saw that it was Gao Hanchun who took the initiative to attack again. Why does this guy keep going on and on? I think he was the one who pinned the crime on young Master D. This guy must have failed to use the 100 Flowers Gates cultivators to deal with young Master D. Now, he can't help but look for trouble himself. Chapter 32-38. All the cultivators present were filled with disgust and impatience towards Gao Hanchun. They felt that this fellow had purposely picked a place where so many people were gathered to cause trouble again and again. He was simply trying to please the crowd with claptrap. In comparison, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had been smeared with dirty water before Master Mo proved that she was indeed a powerful person. On the contrary, everyone had a better impression of her. Those who were truly powerful were so low-key. Instead, it was a bunch of clowns who kept looking for trouble. It was truly a little speechless. Isn't this person the sect leader of the Heaven-Shaking Association, Gao Hanchun? After Gao Hanchun had attracted the attention of the crowd time and time again, many people recognized his identity. I heard that the Heaven-Shaking Association can no longer survive and is on the verge of disbanding. Instead of thinking about how to maintain the Heaven-Shaking Association, he keeps looking for trouble here. What is he trying to do? The Heaven-Shaking Association can no longer be maintained. Most of the members have already left. What's left is just an empty shell. I heard that Gao Hanchun has already found a way out. Look, aren't those beside him the disciples of the Crimson Moon sect? I think they want to join the Crimson Moon sect. There were many smart people present. Although Penglai Island was very big, the incident caused by the Heaven-Shaking Association had attracted too much attention. Therefore, everyone knew quite a bit about it. When the Heaven-Shaking Association was developing very well, they were extremely arrogant. Now that they were gradually declining, naturally, many people were waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. When Xiao Nan saw that the crowd had dragged him into the discussion about Gao Hanchun, his face instantly turned a little ugly. He had indeed intended to recommend Gao Hanchun and the others to the Crimson Moon sect because Gao Hanchun and the other 2 had promised him many benefits. Although Gao Hanchun and the other 2's reputation was not very good, he believed that it would not be a problem for them to become ordinary disciples of the Crimson Moon sect. However, now that the crowd had revealed his relationship with Gao Hanchun and the other 2, he felt that he had lost face. After all, it was Gao Hanchuan's and the others' business to be ridiculed for reaching this point. It was not appropriate for him to be implicated. When Gao Hanchun made his move, a cold glint flashed across Di Beichun's eyes. Their original intention was to participate in this auction to obtain the Tears of Frigid Heat. They never imagined that Gao Hanshun would repeatedly disrupt their plans. One could imagine the unhappiness in their hearts. However, just as Gao Hanshun was about to make a move, a man blocked Gao Hanshun's hand. Gao Hanshun's expression immediately turned ugly when the opponent easily dispelled his attack that was supposed to be a sure win move. However, when Gao Hanshun saw the person's real appearance, he could not help but be shocked. This was because the cultivator in front of him was none other than the person in charge of the Golden Flame Auction House, Manager Jean. Syndicate Leader Gao, I don't care what kind of deep grudge you have with the other party. However, if you dare to make a move in my Golden Flame Auction House, I have no choice but to interfere. Manager Jin's round face was filled with a faint smile. However, his words were filled with warning. It's not the first time you've come to our auction house. You can't have forgotten our auction house's rules completely, right? Chapter 32-39. Fights were not allowed in the Golden Flame Auction House. This was a rule that everyone was well aware of. It was said that there was once a person who thought highly of himself and ignored this rule of the Golden Flame Auction House. In the end, a cultivator from the Golden Flame Auction House broke his leg and threw him out. The person kept clamoring for revenge, but there was no news of him in the end. Ever since that incident, no one dared to challenge the rules of the Golden Flame Auction House because they could not bear the consequences. Gao Hanshun knew very well that his identity could not be compared to the cultivator from the Golden Flame Auction House who had provoked him back then. Given the methods of the Golden Flame Auction House, it was undoubtedly easy for them to take his life. Previously, he was just in a fit of anger and had forgotten where he was. It was extremely embarrassing. Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun's faces turned ugly in an instant. They knew very well that nothing good would come out of offending the Golden Flame Auction House. Shaolin had already taken a few steps back the moment Steward Jean appeared. Obviously, he did not want to have anything to do with Gao Hanshun and the other two. Because of these three guys, he first offended LV Dong and Master Mo, and then he was mocked by everyone. He realized that these three guys were simply trouble wherever they went. If he offended Steward Jean of the Golden Flame Auction House, because of this, it would not be worth it. At this moment, Xiao Nen had secretly made up his mind. He no longer expected any benefits from Gao Hanshun and the other two. No matter how many benefits there were, they could not be more troublesome than the three of them. At the same time, the eyes of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three also fell on Manager Jin's body. His round and fat body, his round face, it was as if he was very oily on a daily basis. However, it would be the biggest mistake to ignore Steward Jean because of this. Steward Jean had easily taken Gao Hanshun's attack, just now, which already proved his strength. A wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. Previously, Gao Hanshun could not see the situation clearly and only wanted to kill Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. However, after Steward Jean appeared, he no longer had such thoughts. Steward Jean, I was too impulsive just now. I didn't mean to break the rules of the auction house. Gao Hanshun hurriedly apologized. Seeing Gao Hanshun immediately change his attitude, the smile in Steward Jin's eyes deepened. He said, Our Golden Flame Auction House has always been a business. It's undoubtedly great that Master Gao can think things through. As he said that, Steward Jean could not help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. Hearing Steward Jin's answer, Gao Hanshun and the others could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. However, when they looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, the resentment in their eyes became even more intense. They really did not expect these guys to be so lucky. Every time, they would be able to avoid it so coincidentally. Instead, it was them who got into trouble. Chapter 32-40. Originally, whether it was LV Dong looking for trouble or Gao Hanshun discovering that they were the murderers of Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxia, it should have been a big problem. Just by standing in the Golden Flame Auction House, they didn't even need to do anything. Someone had already come to help them solve this problem. From beginning to end, they just stood there without moving. Instead, it was LV Dong and Gao Hanshun who were completely disgraced. Di Beichun quietly sized up Steward Jean. Just now, He didn't ignore Steward Jin's gaze when he looked at them. Earlier, he already felt that it was impossible for Steward Jin to not come looking for them. After noticing Steward Jin's meaningful gaze, he understood that Steward Jin had probably noticed them long ago. It was just that he hadn't come looking for them. At this moment, a figure appeared beside Steward Jin. After seeing Di Beichun, a look of surprise appeared on the other party's face. He couldn't help but say, "Little brother, I didn't expect us to meet again. What a coincidence." Hearing this, Di Beichun turned his head and immediately recognized that this was Di Yujue, whom he had invited to drink a few days ago. Immediately, a joyful smile appeared on Di Beichun's face. Yes, what a coincidence. The moment Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun saw Di Yujue, their faces became abnormally pale. They still couldn't forget that death-like gaze. At this moment, when they saw Di Yujue, it was as if they had fallen into an endless abyss. This person was like a death god in their hearts. If possible, they only hoped that they would never see him again in their lives. They didn't expect to meet him again in just a few days. Most importantly, this person seemed to be very familiar with Di Beichun. Gao Hanshan originally didn't know about Di Yujue's situation, but after Xiaonan left that day, Lu Jiangang and the other two had already told him about the specific situation, and he was also very afraid in his heart. However, he couldn't understand. Whether it was Mo Xingyu or this extremely terrifying Di Yujue in front of him, they were not simple people. How did they become friends with Bailey Hongzhuang and the others who had just arrived at Penglai Island for less than half a year? Birds of a feather flock together. This is a rule that applies everywhere. Logically speaking, if he didn't have enough ability, you wouldn't be able to get such a cultivator to befriend him. However, the scene before him really made him feel a little stunned. When Manager Jean saw that Di Yujue actually knew Di Beichun, his fat face couldn't help but reveal a hint of surprise. "Young master, you know them?" Di Yujue smiled faintly and nodded. "They're my friends." As soon as these words came out, Manager Jin's face suddenly revealed a deep shock. With Di Yujue's noble status, he rarely had the chance to see Di Yujue. Furthermore, he had never heard Di Yujue say that anyone was his friend. Di Beichun and the others had just arrived at Penglai Island. Logically speaking, they shouldn't have had the chance to meet Di Yujue. How did they become friends with Di Yujue in the blink of an eye? However, Gao Hanshun and the others were completely dumbfounded when they heard how Manager Jin addressed Di Yujue. With Manager Jin's status, he actually addressed Di Yujue as young master. Doesn't this mean that Di Yujue's status in the Golden Flame Auction House is higher? Chapter 32:41. Xiaohunan immediately recognized Di Yujue. He really did not expect that the cultivator they casually drove away that day would have such a strong background. As long as Di Yujue opened his mouth, their lives would be in danger. Thinking of this, more and more cold sweat appeared on Xiaonan's forehead. Fortunately, Di Yujue did not get angry that day. Otherwise, he would really be done for. Now, he only hoped that Di Yujue did not notice his existence at that time. After all, he was not the one who drove Di Yujue away. At this moment, Xiaonan no longer hesitated. He turned around and walked directly to the back of the group. He was no longer willing to have anything to do with Gao Hanshun and the other two. Wasn't this causing trouble for himself? "Manager Jean, since my friends are here, you can bring them to the box," Di Yujue said lightly. Hearing this, Manager Jean nodded repeatedly. Yes. Di Yujue then turned to look at Di Beichun and the others, saying, "The environment in the box is much more comfortable than the ordinary seats. The bidding service there will also be better. I still have some things to do, so I can't accompany you. Let's meet again next time, okay?" Di Beichun nodded. "Thank you. Since you're here at the Golden Flame Auction House, as the host, it's natural for me to take good care of my friends," Di Yujue said with a faint smile on his face, and his eyes were filled with admiration for Di Beichun. When he first met Di Beichun did not know his identity at all. Just now, when he revealed his identity, he clearly noticed a flash of surprise in Di Beichun's eyes. However, he only saw admiration and understanding in Di Beichun's eyes and did not see any flattery. This already made him have a good impression of him. Manager Jean, take good care of them. I'll take my leave first. Yes. After Diujua left, the way everyone looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three changed. If it was said that Mo Xingyu's previous words had already raised everyone's opinion of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three, then Diujua's appearance had already caused everyone to categorize the four of them as people that should not be provoked. As long as it was a cultivator who had some relationship with the Golden Flame auction house, no one would be willing to offend them. Not to mention that the person Bailey Hongzhuang and the others knew was very likely to be the young master of the Golden Flame auction house. Immediately, everyone looked at the ashen-faced Gao, Han Shun, and the others with eyes full of mockery. Previously, he had already felt that these fellows were playing to the gallery. Now they were slapping him in the face one after another. This was no longer a slap in the face, but a death wish. Under Manager Jin's lead, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three directly arrived at the private room of the Golden Flame auction house. As everyone knew, those who were able to participate in the auction in the private rooms were usually wealthy and respectable people. The private rooms of the Golden Flame auction house were a place to show off one's status. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter at all. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three entered the private room, they immediately realized that the Golden Flame auction house's magnificence and decorations were not something that ordinary people could compare to. The entire private room was mainly black, inlaid with a faint gold color. It was low-key yet gorgeous, respectable yet not ostentatious. The four sides of the room were filled with high-quality soft cushions, making it exceptionally comfortable to sit in. The most important thing was that they could clearly see the auction items on the stage, which was far better than an ordinary seat. Chapter 3242. Hearing Steward Jin's words, Deep Beichun shook his head and said, "This place is already very good. We are very satisfied." The smile on Steward Jin's face deepened. "You are all friends of our young master. Young master has specially instructed me to treat you well. No matter what you need, you could directly ask me. If I am not here, you can also ask the waiter. We will definitely arrange it properly. Steward Jin is too polite. Everything is fine with us. There is no need to make any more arrangements." Di Beichan said with a faint smile. Steward Jin nodded and waved his hand. The waiter outside the door had already brought in all kinds of snacks and drinks. "Then please rest here for a while. The auction will start soon. I still have some things to tell you. If you need anything, just inform the waiter outside the door. She will contact me. Steward Jin, just do your thing. Everything is fine here." After Steward Jin left, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three people looked at each other and sighed in their hearts. The service of the Golden Flame auction house is really thoughtful. The auction houses we went to before can't be compared with this one. Shangguan Yingying sighed. This service and this attitude really made them feel like VIPs. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. "We are sitting in this box and can see the situation on the auction stage very clearly. It should have been processed by special means. It feels as if the stand is right in front of us. I heard that ordinary people can't enter the box of the Golden Flame auction house. Usually, only the higher-ups of the other three forces can enter the box. I didn't expect that we would also receive such treatment. I'm afraid no one would believe me if I told them." Xiren chuckled. "Di Beichun, your ability is also amazing. A person you met casually has such a great background. Logically speaking, a person of such status shouldn't have made friends with someone he met by chance. It seems like you two are not just fated to meet." Di Beichun looked calm. "I just felt a very special feeling when I saw him. Even today, I still feel the same. I don't care about his identity. Compared to that, he hoped that he could find the source of this special feeling. Beichun, Diuju's status in the Golden Flame auction house is not simple. If we can't get the tears of frigid flame back, will there be a glimmer of hope for us to ask him?" Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichun with her pitch-black phoenix eyes twinkling. Previously, they had been thinking about how to negotiate with the higher-ups of the Golden Flame auction house. Steward Qin had made it clear that Steward Jin seemed unable to make a decision on this matter. But Diuju's status was higher than Steward Jin's, so maybe there was hope. This way, maybe Beichun's problem. And Jin. This way, maybe Beichen's S. Let's take a look at the situation of this auction first. Di Beichen said slowly. He always felt that his friendship with Di Yujue was very pure. If possible, he didn't want to destroy it because of other things. Chapter 3243. As Gaohan Shun and the other two entered the ordinary seats of the auction, they realized that Xiao Nan, who had been following behind them, was nowhere to be found. Previously, all of their attention had been focused on Di Yujue and Di Beichen. They had not noticed the situation behind them at all. Why has Big Brother Xiao disappeared? Could it be that we got separated when we entered? Lu Jiangang furrowed his brows as a puzzled look appeared on his face. However, Gao Hanchun and Gue Jun's expressions have turned extremely ugly. They were not as simple as Lu Jiangang had thought. They knew very well that Xiao Nan had probably decided to draw a clear line between them after what had just happened. Hence, he had immediately separated from them. Big Brother, Xiao Nan has left just like that. Doesn't that mean that our plan to join the Crimson Moon sect? Gue Jun stared at Gao Hanchun with an ugly look on his face. This was truly a case of one trouble after another. It had not been easy for them to obtain confirmation from Xiao Nan. As long as they could join the Crimson Moon sect, their current predicament would at least be resolved. However, with this commotion, would they not be back to where they started? Even the possibility of joining the Crimson Moon sect was gone. Gao Hanchun clenched his fists tightly. At this moment, he could no longer care about any of this. He only wanted to tear Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three into 1,000 pieces. Only then would he be able to quell the rage in his heart. If it had not been for these fellows, he would not have ended up in this state. Gue Jun, Jiangang, I've dragged you down this time. Gao Hanchun sighed as his face filled with guilt. If it had not been for me, you would not have ended up in this state. Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun could not help but shake their heads when they heard Gao Hanchun's words. They said, Big Brother, when we first became sworn brothers, we had already sworn that we would share blessings and hardships. Your matters are our matters. How can you say that you dragged us down? It's fine if we can't join the Crimson Moon sect. The entire Penglai Island is so big. I don't believe that there won't be a place for the three of us. Gao Hanchun patted Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun's shoulders as his face filled with gratitude. Good brothers. Big Brother, in my opinion, those four people aren't simple. If we want to take revenge, I'm afraid we'll have to think about it carefully. Gue Jun glanced at Gao Hanchun. He could not be more clear about the latter's thoughts. However, based on the current situation, it would not be easy to take revenge immediately. Gao Hanchun nodded. I understand what you mean. I've already calmed down. No matter what, I must take revenge. But we can discuss this plan first. It's good that you understand. Gue Jun heaved a sigh of relief. What he was most afraid of was that Gao Hanchun would be hot-headed and directly rush up to attack. Who knew if the other party had some tricks up his sleeve? If that were to happen, they would be doomed. Gao Hanchun must be thinking about how to deal with us now. In my opinion, we have to be careful after this auction. Xiren's face darkened slightly, and a serious look flashed in his eyes. Di Beichen nodded. But I'm afraid that what happened just now has given them some scruples. I'm afraid they won't dare to act rashly for the time being. We have to find a way to solve this problem. Chapter 3244. Bailey Hongzhuang said in a low voice. Because her cultivation was not as good as Gao Hanchun and the others, she could only make a rough judgment based on the aura, but she believed that the gap should not be too big. With their current strength, it was indeed not an easy task to deal with someone with such a cultivation base. Even if they had broken through to the 5th level of the Purple Realm, they could still fight against cultivators at the 6th level of the Purple Realm and even the 7th level of the Purple Realm. However, if they were to face Gao Hanchun, who was at the 8th level of the Purple Realm, it would not be so simple. After all, at this level of cultivation, every increase in strength would bring an extremely shocking increase in combat strength. If we were to fight them head-on, we would be at a disadvantage. However, judging from the current situation of the Jintian Association, I'm afraid that the three of them will not be able to find any other helpers. It is not impossible for us to fight them together. Di Beichen said slowly in a low voice. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with thoughts. That's right. Even if we were to fight them head-on, we still have a chance. In that case, we might as well put this matter to the back of our minds for the time being. After the auction is over, we will think about how to deal with them. Xiren looked carefree. What he was most concerned about now was Di Beichen's change in physique. Gao Han Chun and the others were no longer the same as before, so there was no need to be as wary as before. Soon, the auction of the Golden Flame auction house began under the expectant gaze of the crowd. A graceful woman walked up to the ring. Her outstanding face and enchanting figure attracted the attention of the crowd in an instant. However, there was no coquettishness on this woman's face. On the contrary, it was filled with nobility and confidence. "I am the auctioneer of today's auction, Enya." Enya bowed deeply to the crowd, and the cleavage in front of her chest caused the crowd to exclaim in surprise. It had to be said that in this kind of slightly tense and depressing auction, such a woman was indeed pleasing to the eyes. Today's auction is carefully prepared by our Golden Flame auction house. There are countless precious treasures. The auction catalog has already appeared in everyone's hands. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to it. Enya's red lips were slightly raised. Her bright eyes looked at the black mass below the stage, but her face was calm and composed. Next, I will start the auction with the first item. In order to avoid vicious competition, each bid must not be less than 100 spirit stones. At the same time, I need to remind everyone of the rules of our auction house. I don't wish for any trouble to occur during the auction. Otherwise, you will become an unwelcome guest of our auction house. There was a faint smile on Enya's face. It was obviously a warning, but when it came out her mouth, it was not so stiff and hard to accept. That's not all. I hope that everyone can take note of their own wealth when bidding. If you bid for a treasure that you can't afford because of a momentary competition, I'm afraid the consequences will be extremely troublesome. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the others heard Enya's words, they couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. A big auction house is indeed a big auction house. The introduction at the beginning was not to arouse the crowd's enthusiasm, but to give everyone alarm after alarm. Chapter 32:45. I'm afraid that only an auction house like the Golden Flame auction house can do such a thing. If it was an ordinary auction house, just a few simple words would have destroyed everyone's interest and good impression. Shangguan Ying pouted. This scene was really unexpected. When Xiren smiled faintly, I think that this method is quite good. This way, the possibility of conflict can be minimized. The Golden Flame auction house holds an auction every day. If there is always vicious competition or people who owe money, wouldn't it be troublesome? It seems that it's not easy to cause trouble in this auction house. Xiao He frowned. In that case, if we can't get the tears of glacial flame, it won't be that easy to steal it back. As soon as she said that, the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three changed slightly. This was the first time they had come to the Golden Flame auction house. However, judging from everything that had happened before, the rules of the Golden Flame auction house were extremely strict. It was almost impossible for them to do anything sneaky here. Now, our biggest hope is that Steward Qin can get the tears of glacial flame. After all, his wealth is much more than ours. When Xiren sighed, just as everyone was talking, the first auction item was brought up. There was almost no need for Enya to introduce it. The enthusiasm of the bidders below the stage had completely exploded. In fact, all the items in this auction were very attractive to cultivators. As long as they were brought out, it was enough to attract everyone's fiery gazes. Therefore, after Enya mentioned a base price, the sound of bidding continued to ring out. Every time a sign was raised, Enya would call out a new price. Looking at such a lively scene, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three were also amazed. This degree of enthusiasm was more explosive than they had imagined. There are really many rich people in Penglai Island. Just this first auction item will probably be sold for an incredible price. Shangguan Ying stared at the black mass of ordinary cultivators below the stage and sighed in her heart. These people were really capable. Compared to the predicament they were in when they came to Penglai Island, if it wasn't for Bailey Hongzhuang's medicine to help them get out of the predicament, They would probably only be able to watch helplessly even if they came to participate in the auction now. Comparisons were odious. This point was not wrong at all. The items at the beginning of the auction are just appetizers. The competition will become more intense as the auction progresses. At that time, we will be able to see the true strength of these cultivators. When Zyron shook his head, they are really evil rich people. Most of the people who bought these things are ordinary cultivators, and the people who will be bidding later on are probably the various powers. These people also know that if they want to bid for the treasures at the back, there is basically no hope. They can only put all their hopes on the items at the front of the auction. As long as it helps their own cultivation, it is not a loss. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Chapter 32:46. There's no rush. Di Beichen's expression was calm. Hongzhuang said that the tears of Frosty Flame are useless to ordinary people. I presume that even if someone bids for it, it won't be sold for too high a price. After all, other treasures are much more attractive than the tears of Frosty Flame in their eyes. Everyone nodded. They could only look forward to it now. Bailey Hongzhuang's gaze fell on the auction catalog. The map fragment that she was interested in was very close to the front. It wouldn't be long before it would be auctioned. She was determined to get this map fragment. Hongzhuang, what are you looking at? Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but ask when she saw Bailey Hongzhuang looking at the auction catalog. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and pointed at the map fragment on the auction catalog. We have to think of a way to get this map fragment. As soon as these words were spoken, a wisp of curiosity appeared on the faces of Shangguan Yingying and Wen Xiren. Incomplete map? It's only a quarter of the map fragment. What do we need it for? Beichen and I got this map fragment a few years ago. Including this map fragment that's being auctioned now, we have 3. Bailey Hongzhuang said slowly. Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. Really? Are you sure that the map fragment you got before is the same as this one? Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Of course. This map fragment is very special. It's impossible to copy it. As her voice fell, Bailey Hongzhuang directly took out the 2 pieces of the map and said, "Take a look." Shangguan Yingying and Xiren each took a map fragment and compared it with a map fragment in the catalog. Their eyes lit up. It's really the same map fragment. What a coincidence. It's such a small chance for you to find it. We also think that it's a coincidence. Maybe it's fate. Di Beichen's lips curved slightly. Since we've found it, we naturally have to get it. Xiren looked at the map fragment in his eyes. However, no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't understand where it was drawn. He couldn't help but ask, "Do you know where this map fragment points to? Could it be a treasure?" "I don't know." Di Beichen shook his head helplessly. "I'm afraid we can't tell before the 4 map fragments are gathered. However, the method used to draw this map fragment is very special. Everything is done in such a secretive manner that it shouldn't be something ordinary. In my opinion, this might be a treasure map." Xiren's eyes lit up with interest. "I didn't think that there would be such an interesting thing. If it really is a treasure map, then we've struck it rich." Looking at Xiren's excited expression, Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but laugh and shake their heads. Even if they had seen the 3rd map fragment, they couldn't be sure where the 4th map fragment was. It was very likely that they would never find it in their lifetime. "Keep dreaming." Shangguan Yingying glanced at Xiren. "The map fragments are scattered all over the Shengxian continent. Who knows where the last one is?" Chapter 32:47. The next item to be auctioned is today's 10th auction item, the incomplete map. On the auction stage, a tray was placed in front of Inya, and a piece of the incomplete map was placed on the tray. This incomplete map was accidentally obtained by our auction house. Because its production method is extremely special, we concluded that the things drawn on this incomplete map are probably not simple. However, because this incomplete map is only a quarter of the complete map, we decided to sell it. If you bid for it, once you gather all 4 pieces of the incomplete map, you may get a great opportunity. Now, the bidding begins, and the starting price is 10,000 spirit stones. As Inya's voice fell, the atmosphere in the room froze for a moment. For the other treasures, everyone was very interested in buying them, But for this incomplete map, no one was so enthusiastic about it. Since the Golden Flame auction house had appraised it as an extraordinary map fragment, its value was definitely not low. However, it was only a quarter of the incomplete map fragment. Everyone knew how difficult it was to find the other 3/4. Even if one bought this incomplete map fragment, they would only be able to look at it. There was no point in it all, unless one was extremely lucky and was confident that they could gather all 4 incomplete maps. Therefore, there was a moment of silence. Inya's face was always filled with a faint smile. Even if there was an awkward silence, she did not show the slightest bit of nervousness. She just looked at the people below the stage indifferently. It was very rare for the items sold by the Golden Flame auction house to go unsold, and for an auction of this level, the possibility of it going unsold was even smaller. Bailey Hongzhuang was not in a hurry to bid. So far, she had not seen anyone in the private room bid. Even if they wanted to bid, it was best to wait until everyone raised the price to a similar level. This way, they could avoid many problems. Although they didn't have the qualifications to sit in this private room, since they were already here, they should show their identity. This awkward silence did not last long, and soon, cultivators began to bid. 15,000 spirit stones. 11,000 spirit stones. Because it was too difficult to gather all the pieces of the incomplete map, everyone did not bid high. After all, if they couldn't gather all the pieces, it was no different from a piece of scrap paper. It was okay if they spent a small price to buy it back as a memento, but if they spent a high price just for such a hope, there was really something wrong with them. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were relieved after hearing the increase in price. Since no one was determined to get the incomplete map, they should be able to get it at a lower price. 15,000 spirit stones. At this time, a familiar voice came into the ears of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, causing their gazes to change a little. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 looked at each other, and a hint of surprise appeared in their eyes. Gao Hanshun is actually bidding for this incomplete map? That voice sounds like him. Shangwan Yingying nodded her head. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned slightly. I didn't expect Gao Hanshun to be interested in this map. Chapter 3248. Gao Hanshun doesn't look like someone who would be interested in the map fragment. When Xiren sighed, he really didn't want to have anything to do with Gao Hanshun anymore. He didn't expect that they would be involved in the end. It really made him feel helpless. Di Beicheng glanced at the ordinary seats below indifferently. I'm afraid some things are destined. Don't worry about them. Let's just take care of ourselves. Hearing Di Beicheng's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also felt that this was an ill-fated relationship. Encountering Gao Hanshun and the others would be a disaster for both them and Gao Hanshun. If Gao Hanxiao and Gao Hanxiu hadn't harbored ill intentions towards them, they wouldn't have taken their lives. Similarly, if Gao Hanshun hadn't threatened to take their lives and hunted them down on Emerald Island, they wouldn't have let the Jintian faction fall to its current state. In the end, Gao Hanshun was the unluckiest one. They didn't suffer much loss, but they were in a lot of trouble. 20,000 spirit stones. Gao Hanshun called out again. He was determined to get this map fragment. Long ago, he had coincidentally obtained an incomplete map. Although he did not understand what was drawn on it, he could feel the uniqueness of this map. He always felt that it was absolutely not simple. All these years, he had been collecting this map fragment, hoping that he would have the chance to see the other 3 map fragments in the future. However, he hadn't received any news. He didn't expect to see this map fragment in the Golden Flame auction house's catalog. He immediately felt that this was fate and that this map fragment would definitely fall into his hands. He believed that he could really collect all these map fragments in his lifetime. Perhaps the secret behind this map fragment would be enough for him to live comfortably. As Gao Hanchuan's bid was heard, the auction house couldn't help but fall silent. When the price of this map fragment reached such a high level, no one had any intention of continuing to bid. Seeing this, Gao Hanshun couldn't help but smile. It seemed that this map fragment was going to fall into his hands. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the private room. 30,000 spirit stones. As this voice fell, A hint of surprise appeared in the eyes of many cultivators present. They were very clear about the rules of the Golden Flame Auction House. It was not a place that could be entered with money alone. One must have sufficient power and background on Penglai Island. Therefore, every cultivator who could enter the Golden Flame Auction House was someone that everyone wanted to befriend. However, usually, the people in this box would only start bidding at the end of the auction. He didn't expect them to be interested in this map fragment. For a time, everyone's interest in the map fragment couldn't help but increase slightly. However, when they thought about the identity and status of the other party, it was utterly meaningless for them to participate in the competition. On the contrary, they might even offend the other party. It was truly unwise. Thus, practically everyone had given up on continuing the competition. However, when Gao Hanshun heard the voice, his face suddenly became extremely unsightly because he was familiar with the voice. It's these despicable fellows again. Chapter 3249. Big Brother. These guys are obviously here to mess things up. Lu Jiangang frowned. He did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang and the others to be so despicable. They were just bidding for an incomplete map, yet they wanted to mess things up like this. Gue Jun's face darkened. If they deliberately mess things up, I'm afraid it won't be so easy for us to get this incomplete map. I'm afraid the price will be much higher than what we're paying now. There's no other way. I'm determined to get this incomplete map. Gao Hanchuan's eyes were filled with a fierce and determined light. If he did not have the other incomplete map, it would be fine. Now that the other incomplete map had appeared, how could he let go of this opportunity? Lu Jiangang and Gue Jun obviously knew Gao Hanchuan's thoughts about this incomplete map. There were a total of 4 incomplete maps. Gao Hanshun was already extremely lucky to have encountered 2 of them. If he missed it, no one would be willing to do so. However, based on the current situation, they were afraid that they would have to pay a higher price to get this incomplete map back. Big Brother, I believe that they are deliberately using this opportunity to mess with us. Even if they win the bid for the map fragment, it will be useless. Although the price may be higher, it will still fall into our hands in the end, Gue Jun said thoughtfully. Hearing Gue Jun's words, Gao Hanshun also nodded. His thoughts were the same as Gue Jun's. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had just arrived at Penglai Island not long ago. He did not believe that the other party would be rich enough to spend a sum of spirit stones to buy a useless map back. 35,000 spirit stones, Gao Hanshun said again. He wanted to see how much Bailey Hongzhuang and the others could bid. After seeing that Gao Hanshun continued to compete with the cultivators in the private room, a look of surprise appeared in the eyes of the cultivators in the ordinary seats. 50,000 spirit stones, Di Beichen said without hesitation. They had to get this incomplete map. Instead of slowly raising the price like this, it was better to raise the price directly to let the other party know that they were determined to get it. Seeing that the voice from the private room had begun to raise the price by a large margin, a look of understanding appeared in the eyes of the cultivators present. As long as they bid with the cultivators in the private room, the result would often be like this. Even if the cultivators in the ordinary seats were rich, they could not be compared with the cultivators in the private room. You may think that you have spent a lot of money, but for the cultivators in the private room, it was just a drop in the ocean. 55,000 spirit stones. Gao Hanshun clenched his teeth and said, if it was with his original wealth, taking out these spirit stones would be nothing. But unfortunately, the heaven-shaking faction had encountered a great change. He had taken out all his money to save the heaven-shaking faction, so his wealth had been greatly reduced and could not be compared to before. After Di Beichen and the others saw that Gao Hanshun was so obsessed with the map, the light in their eyes gradually became complicated. Chapter 3250. Hearing Xiren's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but look at each other. In fact, it wasn't just when Xiren who had this idea, they had the same idea. If they were interested, it was still possible to buy the map fragment at a low price. But if they spent too much money, it wouldn't be worth it. What's more, according to their understanding of the situation, the Jintian faction was in a very bad situation. Gao Hanshun and the others obviously didn't have any spare money. So this move was very interesting. If the fourth map fragment is really in Gao Hanchuan's hands, then we can put the four map fragments together, right? Shangguan Yingying's eyes lit up. Originally, they were thinking about how to find the fourth map fragment, but now it appeared directly in front of them. If that's the case, doesn't that mean I was right? A smile appeared on Ziren's face. He had previously said that it would be easy for them to obtain the fourth map fragment, and that it would soon appear in front of them. He didn't expect that not long after he said this, the fourth map fragment might really appear. This was too much of a coincidence. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun were speechless. They really didn't expect Ziren's whimsical words to become reality. However, if this was true, then it was really good news. Originally, we didn't want to make a move on Gao Hanshun and the others so early. Now that the situation has become like this, it seems that we have to make a move on them early. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly said, just for this possibility, they had to check Gao Hanshun and the others' Chinquan bags. 70,000 spiritual stones. Di Beichun said again, but his eyes were fixed on the ordinary seats. He could feel that Gao Hanshun had hesitated when he called out the price of 55,000 spiritual stones. Obviously, he didn't have much money on him. He raised the price of 70,000 spiritual stones to test how much Gao Hanshun valued this map fragment. If Gao Hanshun could bid again, then the possibility of the fourth map fragment being in Gao Hanchuan's possession would be extremely high. Facing the price of 70,000 spirit stones, Gao Hanchuan's eyes were bloodshot. This damned Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were forcing him into a dead end. He only had a total of 100,000 spirit stones on him. He still had to continue living in the future. Now that he no longer had the income from the heaven-shaking faction, the possibility of him joining the Crimson Moon sect was greatly reduced. He was prepared to keep some spirit stones for future use. If he had to hand over all his wealth because of this incomplete map, it would undoubtedly be extremely disadvantageous to him. However, he didn't want to give up on the map fragment just like that. After everyone saw that Gao Hanshun had fallen into silence, a mocking expression appeared on their faces. It's just a fragment of map. Why is this guy trying so hard? No matter how hard he tries, it's useless. From the looks of it, he's already at the end of his rope. I'm afraid he's already reached the bottom line of the price he can afford. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have competed in the beginning. Now that he's offended the cultivators in the private room, isn't he just asking for trouble? The crowd shook their heads and sighed. Such a move was simply too unwise. Chapter 32:51. Once upon a time, no matter where he went, he was the center of everyone's attention. Even the cultivators from the three major forces didn't dare to laugh at him. After all, it was better to be the head of a chicken than the tail of a phoenix. Even if the Heaven-Shaking Association couldn't be compared to the three major forces, as the association leader, his status was still much higher than the ordinary cultivators from the three major forces. However, he just wanted to buy an incomplete map, yet he was ridiculed for overestimating himself. How ironic was this? Thinking of this, Gao Hanshun couldn't help but call out again, 80,000 spirit stones. However, when he called out this price, Gao Hanshun was already filled with anger. These four damned bastards, step by step, they were pushing him into a corner. One day, he would tear these four bastards into pieces. Seeing Gao Hanshun bid again, Di Beichun's deep and wise eyes flashed with a faint light, but the corners of his lips slowly rose into a smile. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichun's expression and couldn't help but ask, "You don't plan to continue bidding? Since there will be a battle between us sooner or later, what difference does it make whether we buy it or they buy it?" Di Beichun's lips curled into a faint smile. Whether they win or Gao Hanshun wins in the end, these four incomplete map pieces will definitely be pieced together. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Indeed, but I'm afraid our plan will have to be brought forward. With Gao Hanchuan's speed of offending people, I'm afraid we don't know when he will lose his life. We can't let this map piece fall into the hands of others. Ziren moved closer to Di Beichun and said, "In that case, you all agree with me. The fourth map piece is in Gao Hanchuan's hands." Most likely, Di Beichun nodded. If not, Gao Hanshun wouldn't be so desperate for this map piece. Suddenly, the smile in everyone's eyes deepened. They didn't expect that they would really be able to complete the map piece. Their luck was really extraordinary. In that case, will Gao Hanshun and the others know that we have the map piece? Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but ask. Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and shook her head. Her lips curled into a faint smile. In my opinion, Gao Hanshun probably thinks that we are deliberately messing with them, so he raised the price. After all, we didn't bid first, but waited for them to bid. Speaking of which, Gao Hanshun had actually taken advantage of them by bidding a little later. Otherwise, Gao Hanshun would be the one who knew what was going on. That's great. When Xiren's eyes shone with joy. Once we put these 4 pieces of the map together, we will know what kind of secret lies behind it. It's too early to talk about this. Even if we want to deal with Gao Hanshun and the others, we have to think about it carefully and come up with a foolproof plan. Otherwise, if we are careless and lose our lives, that would be terrible. Di Beichen smiled. After Gao Hanshun called out the price of 80,000 spiritual stones, his gaze lingered on the private room on the 2nd floor. He wanted to see if Bailey Hongzhuang and the others would continue. However, he knew very well that if the other party continued to raise the price, he would have to give up on this path. Chapter 3252. Just when everyone thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others would continue to bid, there was no news from them at all. Regarding this, everyone was also shocked. Their minds were somewhat unable to react. Logically speaking, such a price was nothing to the cultivators in the private room. Similarly, after Gao Hanshun and the others saw that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had stopped bidding, they were even more certain that these guys were deliberately making them pay more spirit stones. Inyu was also a little surprised by this scene, but she was very grateful to the cultivators in the private room. If it weren't for them, it would be difficult for this map fragment to be auctioned at such a price. 80,000 spirit stones, according to the value of this map fragment, was already considered a very good price. In the end, the map fragment fell into Gao Hanshun's hands, but Gao Hanshun, who got this map fragment, did not feel the slightest joy, only a kind of humiliation. After Manager Jean arranged all kinds of things for the auction, he came to Di Lao's room. He felt that it was necessary to report what had just happened to Di Lao. Di Lao, I just saw Di Bei and Di Chun in the auction hall. What surprised me was that the young master actually knew them and claimed to be good friends with Di Chun. Manager Jean said, while sizing up Di Lao. According to his understanding, the young master was usually not in Panlai Island. Logically speaking, it was impossible for them to know each other. If Di Chun was really a good friend of the young master, then their plan could not be used against Di Chun. Listening to Manager Jin's words, Di Lao's face could not help but show a touch of surprise. They are friends. Manager Jean nodded. This is what the young master said personally. Not only that, the young master also let me arrange for them to enter the private room to participate in the auction. Di Lao was silent for a moment. The look in his eyes constantly changed. Could it be that this was fate? He was very clear about his young master's personality. Ordinary people could not enter the young master's eyes at all. Even Di Chun, he was just a very ordinary cultivator. He did not even have the opportunity to see the young master. Now, he could actually become friends with the young master. How could this not surprise him? I already know about this matter. You go and pay attention to the auction, especially the auction of the Tears of Cold Flame. After the auction is over, come and report to me. Yes. Manager Jean retreated, but the doubts in his heart became more and more intense. He faintly felt that Di Lao had other purposes for looking for Di Chun and the others, but he was simply unwilling to tell him. Not long after Manager Jean left, Elder Emperor also arrived before Di Yujue. Young Lord, Elder Di bowed respectfully. Di Yujue turned around and glanced at Di Lao. He nodded and said, "Sit." Young Master, I heard that you become friends with a young man. Elder Di asked. The corners of Di Yujue's lips curled up slightly, and a smile appeared in his eyes. I didn't expect you to be so well informed. You already know about it so quickly. To be honest, young master, the person I was talking about is him. His surname is also Di. Elder Di said slowly. He is a cultivator from the outside world who came to Punlai Island not long ago. I think this is very coincidental. Chapter 32:53. Old Emperor nodded. That's right. Half a year ago, when they first came to Punlai Island, I was the one who received them, so I know the situation very well. If that's the case, then I'm not just fated to meet him. Dyujua chuckled. No wonder I had a special feeling when I first saw him. Young master, do you think he is? Old Emperor asked tentatively. He and Bachin had only met once, but he felt that this young man gave him a very good impression. Dyujua immediately understood Old Emperor's meaning and shook his head. Although I feel that I'm fated to meet him, you and I both know that with the standard of the Shengxian continent's doctors, it's impossible for them to discover the cursed body, let alone cure him. This Bachin is young, but his cultivation is very outstanding. According to my judgment, he should be around 23 or 24 years old. With our family situation, if he can't solve the problem of his physique at this age, it's impossible for him to cultivate to the 5th level of the purple realm. Hearing Dyujue's words, Old Emperor couldn't help but sigh. In fact, he also felt that it was impossible, but since it was such a coincidence, maybe there really was a glimmer of hope. In the end, this was still his wishful thinking. What's more, now that we've collected all the purple dragon emperor ginseng and frosty tears in the entire Shengxian continent, there's no way he can be cured. How could he be like Bachin? At this point, Dyujue's face couldn't help but show a touch of pain. If we still can't find him, I'm afraid he'll really be in danger. As the time approached, the atmosphere in their family became more and more tense. Now, he couldn't even return to the family. As long as he returned to the family, he would definitely face the family master's curses and his wife's resentment. He really regretted it, but unfortunately, he couldn't find any news after searching for so long. It wasn't that he didn't want to go back to the family and face all of this, but his heart was already uncomfortable enough. Facing his family, the guilt in his heart was even stronger. Yes, it was all his fault. Otherwise, my family would not have been unable to be happy for so many years. Looking at Dyujue's expression, Elder D instinctively wanted to comfort him, but unfortunately, he swallowed his words. At this point, no amount of consolation would be of any use. I'm preparing to make a trip to the outside world. Even if there's only a sliver of hope, I can't let it go. Dyujue's gaze became resolute. However, I recently received some news. A very reliable piece of news has appeared in the outside world. I have to personally confirm it. Old Emperor nodded. I hope it's good news this time. Little young master, we really hope to find you soon. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 sat in the private room and watched the items being auctioned off one by one. They didn't have much interest in the items and were only waiting for the tears of frigid heat to be sold. However, the later the auction went on, the higher the price of the item became. When the tears of frigid heat was about to be auctioned, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but worry that they wouldn't be able to obtain it with their current wealth. Next up is the 35th item, Tears of Frigid Flame. Chapter 32:54. For a moment, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were all in high spirits, and their gazes immediately focused on the auction stage. The Tears of Frosty Flame is an extremely precious medicinal herb. Its growth requirements are extremely harsh, and it takes hundreds of years to grow. As long as one has some understanding of medicine, they should know its value. Inya's face had a faint smile as she introduced the effects of the Tears of Frosty Flame to everyone. Among the cultivators present, it was obvious that most of them were unfamiliar with the Tears of Frosty Flame. In fact, every time a medicinal herb was auctioned, it could be sold at a very good price. The premise was that the medicinal herb could help a cultivator increase their strength. Everyone was completely focused on the Tears of Frosty Flame. It was a crystal blue fruit that was blooming with an alluring luster. It was extremely attractive. However, after listening for a long time, the crowd did not hear that the Tears of Frosty Flame would help a cultivator's cultivation. Immediately, the anticipation in their eyes faded by a lot. No matter how precious this medicinal herb was, it was meaningless if it did not increase one's cultivation. Tears of Frosty Flame, starting price, 100,000 spirit stones. As Inya's voice fell, the eyes of all the cultivators present flashed with deep surprise. They were not interested in this medicinal herb, but the starting price of this medicinal herb was actually so high. It was truly beyond their expectations. This also proved that the Golden Flame auction house's price for this medicinal herb was very high. 105,000 spirit stones. Very quickly, the first bid rang out. 110,000 spirit stones. In the private room, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three had been staring at the situation below. Their plan was the same as before, to wait for the ordinary cultivators to bid a certain price before making a move. If they made a move too early, it would expose their eagerness for the Tears of Frosty Flame. Furthermore, they still had to see Steward Qin's plan. Looking at the situation, most cultivators are not interested in the Tears of Frosty Flame. Xiren was a little relieved. The competition for the previous auction items was not ordinary. Almost every time a bid sounded out, it was immediately covered by another voice. Therefore, he had always been a little worried that the Tears of Frosty Flame would be auctioned off in the same situation. Fortunately, based on the current situation, the Tears of Frosty Flame obviously did not have such a craze. 150,000 spiritual stones. After a cultivator from the ordinary seats raised the price to 150,000, the voices calling out bids gradually died down. It was clear that no one was too interested in the Tears of Frosty Flame. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others couldn't help but look at each other. It was time to make a move. Manager Jin's gaze had been fixed on the box where Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 were. He wanted to confirm whether or not Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 had come to the auction for the Tears of Frosty Flame. At the very least, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 had never bid for anything other than the incomplete map. However, Steward Jin also thought that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 were only bidding for the map fragments to prank out Han Shun and the other 2. Their real purpose had not been revealed yet. However, just as Steward Jin thought that it was time for Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 to make a move, a bidding voice suddenly rang out from the box. 200,000 spiritual stones.